Clara usually avoided the Blue Ridge Parkway. The park rangers that patrolled it were a dampener to her vehicular extracurriculars. However, the crisp air of the early October morning, coupled with the fall foliage forecast, gave her enough nostalgia to trade in her energy drinks and off-roading for a pumpkin spice latte and a scenic crawl up the winding parkway. The inchworm traffic, which would have normally annoyed her to no end, allowed her to look out over the array of crimson, orange, and gold that painted the surrounding mountains and valleys. Nestled warmly in her pickup with her best friend, she turned the heater down and took a sip of her coffee. The latest episode of her favorite horror podcast played softly through the truck's stereo, putting her in a festive mood for the spooky season. Josh reached over and paused her podcast before breaking the silence. "It's not too late to get off the parkway and find a gravel road," he said, indicating a turn off to their right. Clara laughed. "I know this is boring, and I promised that we'll get some sliding in today, but I do want to see the mountains while they're this pretty." Josh sighed and reclined his seat back to relax as she resumed the program. As she slowly rounded the bend in the road, the trees dropped off on the right, revealing the Blue Ridge Mountains in all their autumn splendor. She gazed over the valleys and ridges, feeling a shiver rise up her spine, but pushed the primal fear back down. She'd never been fond of heights, but knew there was no risk that she'd go over the edge. The line of vehicles in front of them slowed even further and came to a stop. She frowned, looking ahead, where she could see the parkway curve around the side of the mountain. The cars were also at a standstill, so she put her truck into neutral and pulled the e-brake. If they were going to sit there for a while, she'd rather not have her feet fall asleep from pressing on the clutch and the brake. Josh sat up at the sound of the brake being pulled. "What's up?" Clara pointed ahead. "No one's moving." "Damn," he muttered. "It's okay," she groaned, arching her back and stretching her arms over the steering wheel. "We have a decent view from here at least." Josh snorted in amusement. "For you, maybe. Everything's just yellow and brown for me." "The mountains are still pretty," she retorted. "You're right," he replied with a smile. "We don't get to see this when the trees are blurring by. See, I told you this detour would be worth..." Clara trailed off as movement on the bend ahead caught her attention. People were exiting their cars, leaving the doors wide open as they approached the guardrail that separated them from the trees below. "What on earth are they doing?" she muttered to herself. More people were climbing out of their vehicles, as though a chain reaction had been set off. "Oh my God," Josh whispered, his shocked tone making her look further ahead, where a woman was stepping over the rail. Clara slapped one hand over her mouth to prevent herself from screaming and white-knuckled the wheel with the other as the woman disappeared over the edge. As she watched in horror, another person went over the ledge, and then another. "No," she whimpered. "No, no, no." Josh snapped out of his focus on the atrocity happening in front of them and reached over to grab her face, forcing her to stare into his gray eyes instead. "Don't look at them," he said firmly. "Look at me instead." She nodded, feeling tears slip down her cheeks and wetting his hands. They're... "I know," he told her grimly, "but you don't need to see that." Through her blurred vision, she found her gaze wandering past him to the brightly colored trees beyond the window. They swayed hypnotically, colors and shapes shifting in the foliage. She felt her seat unbuckle, barely aware that her hand had been the one to press the button. "Clara, what are you doing?" Josh demanded as she turned away from him and pulled the door handle, making the cab of the truck repetitively ding to alert them that the keys were still in the ignition. "Clara, stop!" I can't, she mumbled as she pushed open the door and stumbled out onto the pavement. Her legs felt weak, whether from sitting in the car or the trance that the leaves had put her under, but she steadied herself like a newborn deer and took her first step toward the trees. Josh was at her side then, breathing heavy from running around the truck as he grabbed her by the wrist. "What the fuck are you doing?" he shouted in her face. "Are you out of your mind? Get back in the truck!" "The colors," she murmured, trying to step around him. "Fuck the colors, Clara! You're in shock or something!" His grip tightened on her wrist as he tried to grab her shoulder as well, but she swung at him in response, making him flinch away. His grasp on her loosened, and she yanked herself free, resuming her march towards the edge. Just as she lifted her leg to go over the guardrail, the collar of her hoodie yanked tight against her throat, pulling her backwards onto the pavement. Her head smacked against the road, but she didn't care. "No!" she shrieked, batting at Josh as he pinned her down. "I need to see the colors! I need to!" He pulled the hood over her head as she thrashed and cinched the drawstring tight, covering her eyes. She froze. "I need you to stop!" he yelled into her ear. "I don't know what you see, but you can't go." There was a brief silence before Clara sobbed. "Please, don't let me go."